So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really glad to be here. Our director, who was originally invited, couldn't make it, so I'm replacing him. But I can promise you that I still can give you some useful information on energy policy issues. Most of the main points that I will talk about were already mentioned by Mr. Kovács, but maybe I will then give a bit more detail on how that looks like. The European energy policy is built on three main pillars. These three main pillars are sustainability, competitiveness, and security of supply. We are moving towards a joint or common EU policy in terms of energy. We have started with the first strategic energy review, which set out the objectives of 2020-20, meaning 20% energy efficiency improvements, 20% renewable energy, a 20% reduction of CO2 gases until 2020. Then the second strategic energy review tried to focus more on the energy security leg of the EU energy policy. One of the main outcomes of that energy review was the security of gas supply regulation, which came later. This regulation, I think it's very relevant for the Central European region and the V4 countries. One of the main triggers was specifically the gas crisis that happened in 2006 and 2009. Then the competitiveness leg of EU energy policy is dealt with by the so-called third energy package. That intends to liberalize the market. It focuses on different steps and actions, including ownership unbundling, or at least unbundling of the production, transport elements of the energy chain. Then the 2050 roadmap, which was already mentioned by Mr. Kovács, is intended to be a long-term and a wide framework for energy policy until 2050. It again goes back to sustainability criteria, aiming at the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions of up to, well, between 80, 90, or 95% up to 2050, while still improving security of supply and competitiveness. As part of that, and in order to allow these very ambitious targets to be reached, energy infrastructure is one of the main basic conditions. This is why the energy infrastructure package also was adopted at the end of last year by the Commission, and as Mr. Kovács said, is under discussion between the Council and the European Parliament. I will talk about more about these in a minute. The Roadmap 2050 looks at different scenarios for 2050 with the aim of decarbonizing the EU energy system. It provides, it tries to analyze different options or different routes on how to achieve those ambitious goals. One of the scenarios is very strong renewable energy penetration. One of them is a very strong energy efficiency. One of them focuses on nuclear energy. There is also one focusing on strong technological innovation. The aim is not to choose between these different scenarios. The aim is more to look at the wider spectrum of how such objectives can be achieved. The most probable is that the future will look like more as a combination of these different scenarios. However, there are already conclusions which are valid for any of these scenarios. One of them is that the role of electricity will be much higher. If you look at the graph on the upper corner of the slide, the line in blue is if we just continue with what we do now. That would take us to 40% greenhouse gas emission reductions. All the other scenarios, when we aim at 80% of reductions, you will see that the role of electricity is much, much higher in the share of the energy mix. The second element or conclusion that would be valid for all scenarios is that renewable energy will come to a center stage in the energy mix. However, all the other fuels will also have their share of contribution to it in the future, but renewables will be really high. If you look on the left-hand side, that's for 2030, we already see that renewables on the left-hand side of the diagram is already increasing in share. And in 2050, that's the right-hand side diagram, it really multiplies its share in the energy mix. But as you can see, and I know that Mr. Kovács likes nuclear, in all the scenarios, the role of nuclear still is there. There are also other conclusions. Without energy efficiency improvements, this 2050 target will not be achievable. So no matter what, how much renewable energy we try to introduce in the system, without energy efficiency improvements, it will just not be reachable. The fourth point, or the conclusion, which would be valid for each and every scenario, is that because of a higher penetration of renewable energy, the systems will need to be more flexible. It will need to be more robust. If we think about also the different types of renewable energy and where that renewable energy could come from, offshore grids in the North Sea, or solar energy from north of Africa, the impact of all these actions would be felt very strongly on infrastructure. So no matter what or which scenario we will go on, or which combination of these scenarios we will go on, infrastructure will definitely have a very, very important role. Not only the 2050 objective is something that will have has an impact or presents requirements towards infrastructure development. We still currently have challenges in security of supply and competitiveness. On the diagram in the right up corner, you can see the price differences between the countries. That's an example for the gas market. That only shows that market integration is not yet fully achieved. So also, to complete the internal energy market, we still need more infrastructure. As the January 2009 gas crisis showed, in terms of gas security of supply, we also still have challenges. Though the recovery program for energy has co-financed several reverse flow projects, the situation is already better in this region. However, the one-sided supply dependence, especially in the Central European and Southeast European region, is still a challenge which needs to be tackled. The same for electricity. Market integration is not yet fully achieved on the EU level, though it seems that it is more advanced than in gas. But the changes in energy policy in different countries may have an impact on neighboring countries. And one of the issues or challenges still in this region are the non-planned electricity flows going through the region, which use up the existing capacity and doesn't allow trade to the extent that it would be necessary. So still, these challenges are ahead of us, and infrastructure development is still needed to tackle these challenges. So looking at all these challenges, we can see that energy infrastructure is, in a sort of way, the physical condition or the physical baseline for which is needed in order to achieve all the EU energy policy objectives. As I said, a lot has already been achieved. We have the third energy package, which is not yet fully implemented in all the member states, but I guess with some time it will be achieved at some point. The third energy package also set up a European organization of transmission system operators who have to present every 2 years a 10-year network development plan, which shows the projects on the EU level for both electricity and gas. Also, an agency of regulators on the European level has been set up, which again looks at more the EU aspects of regulatory topics. We had also the recovery program, which co-financed several infrastructure projects, and it's still financing. As soon as these projects are implemented, the situation will be much better. And we also have a still current Trans-European Energy Networks program, which unfortunately, due to its size, is really not very useful for infrastructure development. It is very good for feasibility studies, whether a project makes sense or not, but definitely not to push forward energy infrastructure investments. So there are still challenges which remain. I have already presented a few, but there are others. An electricity project in general or in average can take 10 years to get implemented. The permit granting procedures take so long and are so complicated in many countries that even if a project is necessary until it gets implemented, there is just too much time that passes. Also, the regulatory frameworks for infrastructure projects are very much nationally focused. When we talk about integrating the EU market, connecting countries to each other, we have to admit that projects, cross-border projects, would have benefits in several countries. Who could decide, or how can we decide where the benefits are, and how can we make sure that those who benefit from a certain project would also pay the price for it? So there are also proposals on the regulatory framework to make it more EU focused and less nationally focused. These are also issues which hamper infrastructure investments on the EU level. And there is also an increased investment need. Comparing to the current policy scenario, if we don't do anything, we can continue with the amount of investments as we did in the previous decade. But if we have objectives, so like the 80% reduction of greenhouse gases, and we really want to tackle the challenges that I presented, then the investments will need to be much, much higher compared to the previous decade. So also in terms of financing, we face some challenges. And numbers have already been mentioned, the famous 1 trillion euros. This is how it adds up. A bigger part of this 1 trillion euros goes into power generation, and about 2/3 of that into renewables generation projects. About 500 to 600 billion would be necessary for transmission and distribution projects, and the 200 billion that Mr. Kovács mentioned is only covering electricity and gas transmission investments. You can also see that the requirements for investments are about 50% higher in the coming decade than in the decade that we have passed. The energy infrastructure package tries to tackle these remaining challenges. It also provides a framework for financing these projects, but I have to tell you that is not the main point. First of all, it provides some help in speeding up or streamlining permitting procedures, so projects do not take 10 years to get implemented or get their authorization. It also provides some ideas on how benefits can be allocated between the users of a certain project. And then finally, if there is a project which is very necessary from an EU perspective, however, commercially it is not viable and it's very difficult to get investors, then the potential of co-financing from the EU budget is proposed. Obviously, the numbers, well done, 9.1 billion, which is planned for the period between 2014 and 2020, is not yet agreed, and well, we'll see whether that amount remains or it goes lower. But in any case, that could make a difference. That could change the pace of infrastructure development in the coming decades. One of the approaches of the infrastructure package and how it should be developed, or how we should decide what kind of project is important, is basing on a regional approach. A regional approach is well proved to be very useful already in the Baltic Sea region, but also in the V4 countries, or the North-South countries in the east. These blocks or regions have the same priorities, face the same challenges, and it makes sense for these regions to decide themselves what are the projects that would help them achieve the very ambitious objectives. It also combines the top-down approach with the bottom-up. Top-down in that the EU objectives are, or the priorities are presented, and that's one of the criteria how projects could be selected. And the bottom-up is that project promoters, initiatives come and offer their projects, saying that those contribute to the energy objectives of the EU. In the infrastructure package, 12 priority corridors have been identified. 3 of these are so-called horizontal priority corridors. These are smart grids, electricity highways, and CO2 transport infrastructure. These are more long-term priority corridors, and the 9 other priority corridors are all regional or geographically based corridors. And 6 of these actually are relevant for this group of countries. We have gas and electricity priority corridor for Central, Eastern, and Southeastern Europe. We also have an oil priority corridor, which intends to identify the projects which are necessary for a secure oil supply, because even if it is CO2 emissions are high, but we cannot just cut it out from the energy system from one day to the next. And then you have smart grids, electricity highways, and obviously CO2 transport infrastructure. In terms of the North-South initiative and the Visegrad 4, just to make another link, the Visegrad 4 countries have launched the idea of the North-South gas corridor last year. The Commission helped facilitating the initiative, and this region has already come up with a set of regional projects which they think are important. With these priority corridors under the infrastructure package, the geographical scope has been widened, and now it is extended to 13 countries, starting from Poland in the north down to Cyprus itself. And probably one of the priority corridors I have not yet mentioned is one of the most important ones is the Southern Gas Corridor, which would bring then new gas sources into this region. And this region would be like a gateway to receive these new sources of gas and then send it further away, using up part of it and sending further away into the EU. So in order to conclude my presentation. Yes, the EU energy policy objectives remain as they are. They seem to have been working for the the last many decades. However, the targets are getting more and more ambitious. But I think getting the right infrastructure as a basis and having the right mindset and having a bit more, well, focusing more a bit on regional cooperation and the regional view and the EU view can get us that far. Thank you very much for your attention. Köszönöm szépen figyelmet.